Hello and welcome to another podcast edition of Taiwan Talk, ICRT's weekly interview segment, bringing you conversations from and about Taiwan. I'm Keith Manconi. Today on the show, we're going to be speaking with Taiwan-based author John Ross to discuss the re-release of his book, Formosan Odyssey, which offers a compelling look at more than 400 years of Taiwan history and cultural development. Now, it approaches much of this history through the eyes of the many Western explorers and expats that have made their way over to Taiwan over the last several hundred years, whether we're talking about the missionaries or the teachers or the conquerors. There's a lot of stories, a lot of adventures that are tied into Taiwan's history, if you know where to look. The book also traces the misadventures of its author, Mr. John Ross, as he traveled around Taiwan back in 1999 in the wake of the 9/21 earthquake, so kind of interweaves all of those experiences as well. Just a quick few notes about John Ross before we get going. When he wrote Formosan Odyssey in the early 2000s, he was already a long-term expat living in Donan Township in Yunlin County. Not a whole ton of expats down there. Now, several years later, he is the co-founder of Camphor Press, which is a publisher largely focusing on Taiwan-focused books. I've interviewed a number of his colleagues. I've interviewed some of the authors. And now the re-release of Formosan Odyssey, both in an ebook and a hard copy as well, is coming out through Camphor Press as well. So I figured there would be an awful lot for us to talk about, and indeed there was. So this is my conversation with John Ross. John Ross, thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be here, Keith. I'm a work-from-home guy, so I listen to podcasts all day.
Oh, good deal, good deal. So you're somewhat familiar with what we're going to be doing here today. Well, let's just jump right into it. The book came out 2001, quite a bit of time ago. Taiwan has obviously changed more than a little bit over the last couple of years. But let's start where the book came from originally.
Well, I'd come to Taiwan just to make money.
Mm-hmm.
I was finishing off a book on Burma,
mm-hmm.
and I was going to go to Mongolia.
Mm.
I didn't have any intention to write a book about Taiwan, but it was just so interesting that I put the Mongolia book on hold. Still haven't finished it all these years later.
Right.
So little written about Taiwan. It was just amazing. The history, the country itself, culture.
So really the jumping off point for you was I want something that'll kind of make this information about Taiwan a little bit more accessible to newcomers?
Absolutely. So there were these old reprints of books from the 19th century, From Far Formosa,
mm-hmm.
Pioneering in Formosa,
mm-hmm.
and to make those more accessible for the modern reader.
Right. Because those wouldn't really tell you too much about, end of the century Taiwan, beginning of the 21st century Taiwan. A little out of date is...
Yes, you need to provide some background information for people so they can understand it. The other problem was the majority of books were academic press books.
Mm-hmm.
So these people are putting out books for their academic career. They don't give a damn about how many people read their books,
mm-hmm.
how readable they are. So there still are many very good books coming out on Taiwan,
mm-hmm.
but nobody reads them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very easy for someone who can actually write to just read 20 of these books, take out the good bits, put them in a story.
A lot of low-hanging fruit there.
Oh, incredible. So just earlier in this year, for example, there was a magnificent book came out,
mm-hmm.
Accidental State, looking about how Taiwan became the ROC, was quite, as the title states, accidental. Another book was American Justice in Taiwan,
mm-hmm.
about the riots in 1957. Have you heard of those?
No.
Okay, so can you imagine the American embassy in Taipei, downtown Taipei, was ransacked by rioters. Files destroyed. People had to flee for their lives. Incredible, right? So this book covers that, but nobody knows about it.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's going to read about it. Just an academic press.
Right. And that's really what you find in this book. There were so many moments as I was reading through it, where my thought was, how do I not know about this? Because a lot of the stuff that you present, I mean, a lot of it is, basic stuff that you would learn in your first year or two of living in Taiwan, and it's stuff that you really do need to learn to have any understanding of Taiwan. Just the basic outlines of the history, the basic outlines of the culture. But then, every here and there, you kind of stumble on something, and you're like, how did I not know that opium smoking has a real connection to Taiwan? How did I not know that headhunting has played a big role in the very early development of Taiwan? So that was really one of the interesting things to me, all those little gems that you found.
Well, thanks. So the book was easy to write in terms of all this low-hanging fruit, as you mentioned. But the challenge was to make it accessible to the newcomer, but also interesting to the old hand, someone like yourself. Still, occasionally, these little gems. Wow, that's amazing. How did I not know that? Eh?
Right.
Salmanazar, the imposter.
Right.
The guy who claimed to be from Taiwan, even though he was from France, back in the 1700s in England.
Right. The Toast of London.
Yes.
Never really got found out.
Yeah.
Sneaky guy.
The Hungarian Count, Benialski, who claimed to have visited here and had various adventures and fought against Amazon women in the 1700s. All sorts of small things like this, yes.
Right. And as you were kind of delving into this, I mean, as you kind of mentioned a couple minutes ago, Taiwan is not the only place that you've looked at in some depth. Do you feel like you discovered that Taiwan is a particularly rich place for these sort of quirky little tidbits? I mean, it seems pretty jam-packed, its history.
Might just be more a function of me having married and living here. No, Taiwan is a little bit special, I think. There are two reasons for that. It's the geography. It's an island. So it's isolated. And yet it's on a pathway, a main trade route. So it's been important.
So it's in the thick of a lot of different stuff, but at the same time, it has a certain amount of isolation from
Correct.
some of those currents.
So it's a balance of these currents and the isolation. Then the geography of the mountains, which just make it so interesting.
Right.
If it were flat, you would have one or two tribal groups, but you don't, do you? You've got more than a dozen.
Right, and that's why it's so linguistically diverse.
Exactly. So yeah, when you think back, you've got the Spanish here, the Dutch, Japanese, the Cold War politics. Just goes on and on.
Yeah, on and on and on and on. Now, as you were kind of approaching this project, was it a challenge? I mean, you just kind of hinted at it. It wasn't really that hard to find source material, but I mean, I guess we should emphasize to our readers. I mean, you went pretty far out of your way to learn about some of these topics that you were covering. You did interviews. You tracked down some old texts. Tell us a little bit about that.
No, once again, it's very easy. You just go to a library.
So the source material in English is pretty forthcoming?
Yes. I can't read Chinese. I paid a couple of people to read books for me. And, university students, I say, okay, read through that, give me the basic idea. Then, okay, that sounds good. Give me a good translation of it. But no, very easy. The book has travel parts, right? So just go around, describe my travels. It's got interviews. So you have to set that up. You can't just rely on stumbling upon someone interesting. You have to find interesting people to talk to.
An engagement that I'm very familiar with.
And yes, then reading the old books, reading the modern books, reading the academic books, and putting it in a framework, right? So I've got two frames, loose, but two frames. Start chronologically. My travels over the course of the book where I'm traveling around Taiwan. 9/21 earthquake through to the election, right, historic election of Chen Shui-bian. Then the other framework is the chronology of the history of Taiwan, from the early days through to 20th century. It's loose, but it still gives it some frame. If there's one tip I would give on writing, it would be that I don't keep a diary. So that is the kiss of death for writing. That's just like the most boring rubbish you're going to read. You don't need to know what I had for breakfast. Yeah.
So you can still remember all those little anecdotes and interesting tidbits from your life?
I just write notes.
Ah, okay.
So it's like a page with a few things scrawled on it, but not blog form, not diary form. People might think they're going to write something for a blog and then rework it into a book. No, it's still going to read like a blog.
All right. So let's. So we're getting a sense there of some of the craft and writing craft that went into all of this. But let's jump forward a little bit to the publishing craft, because this was re-released in 2014 under a publishing house that you yourself had a hand in creating, Camphor Press. Had a number of your authors on the show, have had one of your co-founders on the show as well. Very interesting work that you guys are doing over there. Could you tell us a little bit about why you were keen on doing a re-release? And B, we should mention that Camphor Press, many of your publications are ebooks. That's kind of your focus. But this year, you decided to release it in paperback. So that's an interesting decision as well.
Well, the original run of the book had run out. And we wanted to get it out for people. Did an ebook, and it's the best-selling book of our books. So doing the print version, the paperback version, was an obvious choice.
Just kind of the next step.
Yeah.
Now you didn't change a whole lot in the re-release, but you did add an afterword, and I think you tidied a couple of things up. What were the biggest changes that you felt that you had to make? More than a decade later.
I cut about 5,000 words from the book, just tightened up the writing, just so that it runs more smoothly. So that's another tip. Ditch the diary. And the second tip, cut. So if you can cut 10% from it, that's good.
Be the brutal editor.
Yes. The other difference was the name on the front. Before it was John Ross, now it's John Grant Ross.
Ooh.
Because I found out there's some commie apologist living in Beijing and a Marxist who writes pro-CCP rubbish.
You wouldn't want to be thrown in with that lot, okay?
No, it's strange. I got this negative reaction sometimes from my name on the internet. And I thought, who's writing this stuff? Huh? Why are they calling me a jerk? Do they know me? I don't know them. And thankfully, no.
They had a different John Ross in mind.
All right.
John Grant Ross. All right. Well, hopefully that's enough levels of separation. We don't know what his middle name is. So it's still some small amount of danger. All right. Well, okay. So that gives our listeners just a little bit of a sense of the work itself and what it's been up to over the last 10 years or so. But let's really dig down into what exactly you're doing with this and kind of the what experience it's coming out of. This book seems to me to be coming out of a very a long tradition of explorers. You kind of talk about many of the explorers that have come to Taiwan in years past, whether they be missionaries or whether they be conquerors or whether they be just actual explorers coming here to map things out or something like that. And that seems to be sort of a through line throughout your book as you kind of travel Taiwan's history. You do find a lot of time to focus on these guys. And running parallel to that, as you mentioned, was your own journey around Taiwan and your own journey of discovery and figuring out what this island was all about. And it's interesting, you say that one of the reasons that you decided to start this journey in the first place is one of these explorers from, in this case, the 19th century, W.A. Pickering. So tell us a little bit about him and why his writings on Taiwan moved you to try this exploration thing out for yourself.
Okay. Pickering went to sea when he was a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike today, when you go to university and you don't have a job until your early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
He was out on the high seas. Then he got a job for the Chinese Imperial Maritime Customs.
Mm.
So that was collecting custom duties from the imports. Then he came to Taiwan. He was the consul down in Anping.
Mm-hmm.
He was just 25 years old.
Mm.
And then he's having all these amazing adventures amongst the Aboriginal tribes and heading up into the mountains. Then he went into private business, and he was involved in the Camphor War of the time. So, yeah, it's just so incredibly colourful.
Mm-hmm.
But my travels are not in any way parallel to that. It's done as sort of a contrast, you know.
Well, parallel lines can be fairly far apart, if I remember my geometry. But yeah, obviously there was something about that experience that was appealing to you. So was that part of the motivation for coming to Taiwan originally?
No. So my exploration was done in other countries: Papua New Guinea, Burma, Mongolia. Taiwan was just the place to make some money and write about it. So when I came here, it was the convenience of teaching English. Back in those days, in the mid-90s, it was very easy to get work. You could work for 6 months, leave, come back, get good paying work right away. So it was off to Mongolia in the summers, then back here. So I didn't have any intention of exploring Taiwan, or, when I use the word exploring, I mean traveling. But, I've done real exploring in other countries, but nothing here.
So what did you find in his work, and what did you take away from that?
Yes, basically reading his book and From Far Formosa just opened up, gave me a new look at Taiwan. I wasn't aware before I read those books just how wild Taiwan was. The number of shipwrecks, that much of the mountains were off limits until quite recent days.
Now, okay, so it seems like you're trying to take a step back from some of the parallels here, but honestly, it seems like there's a couple of them. If we look back to like the very early Dutch that came to the island, you have this very interesting anecdote about how there was sort of a missionary aspect to the Dutch colony, and the folks that they had teaching the Aboriginals in Taiwan were actually many of them Dutch soldiers, and the priests or the clergy, the more religious folk that were kind of running the show, they were always complaining about how useless these soldiers were at teaching and how they were just drunk and debaucherous. I'm having a hard time not seeing a similarity there to the modern expat experience.
Yes, I had no idea when I wrote that down. It's great stuff, isn't it? But when you look at it, you can choose what you want to take away. You can look at the Dutch period and say, my goodness, the past is a foreign country. It's just so different from today. Or you can look at it and say, wow, they're just the same as we are. So the Dutch period is amazing, isn't it? I'm from New Zealand, right? And Fort Zeelandia, New Zealand, Fort Zeelandia. Do you see any connection there?
There is a little bit of a connection. I can see that.
Okay. So Zeelandia is the Latin form of Zeeland, which is sea land in English. So Taiwan, settled by the Dutch in the southwest area in the 1600s. Same time the Dutch were exploring, right? Found New Zealand, called it Nova Zeelandia, and then Captain Cook changed it to New Zealand. But it shows you at the time how important the Dutch were. So you've got these little stories of the Dutch down in Anping, and they're part of this huge trade network and this moment in European history. VOC is the company that settled there. That's the first modern corporation. They sold public shares. That's really the start of Western capitalism as we know it. So yeah, it's just amazing. So many stories. I mean, I couldn't put everything in there. There's a chap called Hendrik Hamel. He was a young bookkeeper on board one of the Dutch ships. So he set off from Anping in 1653. Okay, he's just 22. They're going to Nagasaki, Japan. Okay, at that time the Dutch were the only Europeans allowed to trade with Japan. So they get caught up in a typhoon, wrecked on Jeju Island, and the survivors are taken to Seoul. Later sent out to the provinces. He spent 13 years in Korea. They weren't allowed to leave. If you turned up there, that was it. They wanted to keep it secret. But he managed to escape, and he wrote the first account of the Hermit Kingdom. So that's amazing, isn't it? I mean, so, my God, we live in boring times, don't we, Keith?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because a lot of times when I think about the Taiwan that I'm living in, and I talk to expats that have been around for a little bit longer, I often think to myself, man, have I missed the boat? If I had been here in the 90s, all this crazy stuff was happening in the 90s. It was so wild, all the stories that come out of that. And then I hear, oh, man, no, the 80s. The 80s was the time to be here. And now I read this book and I see, oh, no, it's the 19th century. No, for the real party, it was the 17th century. That's when you wanted to be here.
Yeah. No, for 1990s, for radio, 1990s would be you'd be a radio god.
Well, let's not. That's a little too close to home. We don't need to bring that up.
Radio god.
But I mean, did you do you think that reflecting on this history changed your experience at all as you were traveling a little bit around the island? Because it's interesting to read. You've kind of just jumped off into the unknown in Taiwan, not always with any particular plan, and just kind of found what you found.
Did I?
Well, there was some hiking expeditions that maybe could have used some more preparation.
Yeah, well, preparation. I cut down to about 2 liters a day before I went out. Yes.
Did reflecting on this history at all make your own adventures seem less impressive as you were going through them?
Oh God, yes. So you need a sense of humor, okay? Otherwise, you'd drink yourself to death. No, so you can't really claim to understand everything about a country. So you need some modesty. And like I say, I wish I were living 150 years ago, 400 years ago. So, everything I do compared to the old guys, or even compared to stuff I've done in other countries, is nothing. So hopefully there's not too much ego in the book.
Do you think that it's legitimate to go to a country in the 21st century looking for adventure? I mean, do you think the adventuring days we should really put behind us? Because a lot of these guys that showed up in Taiwan were really treating Taiwan like a playground. Like this was their place to, just be colonial, men about town, and have a good time. Do you think that we've kind of turned that leaf in history, and that's not something that is should happen in the 21st century?
Oh God, fire up the time machine! So ever since I was young, I wanted to be an explorer. Okay, so I was in Papua New Guinea by myself, heading into the remotest parts I could find, and I would come to these villages. They'd never seen a white person before. They were, wearing grass skirts. They didn't have pots. And then it just sort of struck me, I had all these boyish ideas of finding these sort of lost villages. But these were so small. These were like hamlets. These were like a couple of huts. It was like an extended family. And I just sort of said, discoverer of the lost family. And it cured me of that. Yes.
Doesn't quite have the same ring to it. But like you said, have a sense of humor. You can spin a good story about it, and anyway, as long as you're a good writer.
Yes, well, there are still a lot of great stories. Just talk to people.
Mm-hmm. Now, another interesting aspect of the book is that you do not shy away from talking about some of the things that are less pleasing to you about Taiwan. You have some aspects of Taiwan. You're willing to mention the downsides of very over rapid urbanization, the architecture, the pollution, all that. You're not afraid to talk about that a little bit. But clearly, there's something about Taiwan that has drawn you in. Are the downsides that you mentioned in your book, are they real downsides to you, or is there a way in which that just makes the whole mishmash more interesting?
Yes, I think living out in the sticks, Jai County, I avoid some of the problems that you might have up here. Just, the crowds. Yeah, you have to take the good and the bad. The vibrancy comes from the high population density, the chaos. You're walking down a street and you have all these shops. You have life spilling out onto the streets. You've got some guy here making coffins. The next shop is selling dumplings, and then you've got a mechanic. You've got people drying food out on the street. And you're stepping around things, and it's such a hassle. But then that's the color. That's the interest, isn't it? When you go back home to the residential suburbs, you're looking around. The life is so far removed from display, isn't it? So good and bad, yeah.
Now I'm sure that this is something that you've thought about a fair amount as a publisher of works that focus on Asia and Taiwan. What do you think it takes to make good writing about an undercovered place like Taiwan? I mean, obviously, it's as you've sort of hinted at, it's expensive to be a writer. It's time-consuming. It's attention-consuming. So what would it take to kind of support more good writing coming out of Taiwan? And what would you like to see? What kind of coverage of Taiwan would you like to see that's not here right now?
Okay, so 2 parts. I'll deal with the last one first. I'd like to see more written about the Cold War. There are more documents coming out on that. Cold War stories, like espionage. You've got the soldiers going in and doing missions in China. Things like, after the Chinese liberated Tibet, invaded Tibet, there was some resistance. The CIA were involved in training people. They took some Tibetans, they brought them over to Taiwan. All right? And then the project fell through. The Tibetans got stuck here, and they're still living here. There are other tribesmen from Burma that were brought here as part of a UN program to move KMT soldiers from the Golden Triangle out, but the KMT just put some uniforms on some local tribesmen and then moved them here. So it's another group of people who've been displaced during the Cold War. Just interesting stories.
So yet more crazy little stories from this part of the world.
Yeah. Or just, I'd like to see niche stories. Okay. So I would say I went for something general with my book, sort of cover everything.
Right.
And you're still not going to make any money, all right? So just give up the idea you're going to make money. Absolutely. Hobby. Just write what you want to write about. It doesn't matter how niche it is. Anything really niche. It could be like a guide for vegans or something.
You do listen to the show.
Yes. A good example of that is an American guy, Lauren Andel, and he's written 2 books about trains in Taiwan. He's one of these train nuts. So he's a photographer mostly, so his books are picture books. And he's working on other ones. So things like that. Just write about your interest. No one's going to read it anyway, so you're writing for yourself.
All right. Well, let's, given that this book is so chock full of really interesting little tidbits and really interesting historical and cultural observations, let's just close things off on what this book does best, and give me one of the things that, as you were going through the research and putting together this book, that made you stop and go, how did I not know that? That's so amazing. How did I not know that thing? Can we get one more before we go?
Oh, it's been a while. The last time I was talking about this book was 2002, and I was talking to Terry.
No kidding.
In Kaohsiung.
No kidding.
He had a weekly show, community radio. I was his very first guest.
Really?
Yes.
Right there, we just found a little interesting historical tidbit, at least to radio people here.
So I can't bloody remember. Got it.
All right.
Okay. The thing that struck me was foot binding. Foot binding. That's why I have a whole chapter on meeting this eccentric shoe collector. It's not something that's discussed much, is it? It's not written about much. Have you come across it?
No, not. The most I've ever learned about foot binding was in your book.
Okay, so you have this custom for 1,000 years, yeah? And we almost never hear about it. So for me, learning about that, I already knew, about foot binding, but just how extensive it was, and also the sexual aspect to it. And in Taiwan, the Hakas, of course, they didn't bind women's feet, so that, Aborigines, no. But yes, the Chinese settlers, the other ones, did. But when they married local women, what did they do? Bind the children or not?
I don't know.
No?
They did not.
Generally.
So that's kind of how it fell out?
Yes.
Fell out of favor. Right, yeah, and so that's, there's just a whole world there. And picking up on sort of just the trajectory of Taiwan's history now, so this is, of course, an update of sorts, only a decade later, but you do note in a couple of spots that the Taiwan has changed a lot over, the last decade or so since you wrote the first book. In some ways, you say that Taiwan is a nicer place to live, but in other ways, you say that there's kind of a certain dourness that has pervaded the atmosphere here, a little bit of pessimism about the way that things are going. So I guess just to close things out, maybe give your perspective on what's changed since you first issued Formosan Odyssey.
Well, people are earning the exact same amount of money, including me.
Well, that's a thing that stayed the same, but it's not supposed to stay the same.
Right. So that's the main difference. I mean, people feel that.
That'll make anybody dour.
Yes.
I'll tell you, radio jobs are less. I will tell you that.
Taiwanese identity's really grown. Even people who don't think about that kind of thing, they would just say, we Taiwanese rather than before they'd say we Chinese. People travel a lot. It's great. A lot of young people going overseas. I think New Zealand and Taiwan, they had the first working holiday visa set up. That was wonderful. Very much more international. It's easier to live here, even though my younger self would not come.
You don't think so?
No, because originally it was for the money, remember, and it was the flexibility.
Right.
But today you can't do that. You can't just arrive and get a really cool job. Which is better, the quality of English teachers has improved. It's
not just any old jerk that's showing up.
No, so maybe half of them are all right now.
Well, let's not get carried away. Maybe 20, 30%. We won't get too specific on the percentage there.
Yeah. So we're doing better than the Dutch schoolmasters, yeah?
All right, we can take that. We can take that as a positive note.
Yeah. So, speaking of the Dutch and drinking, did somebody mention drinking? No.
It's implied.
Okay. Okay, the Taiwanese, what do they call beer?
Pijiu.
Okay, for Chinese, and Taiwanese, biru.
Right, from the Japanese term for it.
Right, Japanese. Where do you think the Japanese got it from?
English?
Dutch.
It goes full circle.
Yes, Dutch, yeah. So
it's just like Inception. It's like a dream within a dream within a dream.
yes. But does knowing this stuff really make any difference to your enjoyment of the glass?
I'd like to think so.
Yes.
I'd like to think so. Do you think it's made a difference for you?
Yeah, we don't want to be just dumb animals wandering around blindly, do we?
Dumb animals that know the right terms for things.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. No, I mean, it's just fun, isn't it? If it's interesting, but yeah.
Well, and I always operate on the assumption that knowing a little bit more about the place that you live, getting back to us dumb English teachers, I was an English teacher for a little bit of time, that you get more invested in the place and you get to care more about it and want to cultivate it a little bit more. And I mean, that perspective informs a lot of my work. To some extent, a lot of what I do is just directed at helping people understand the place that they're in and hoping that makes them a little bit more invested in it. Does that sort of concern inform any of the work that you did here?
I wasn't really thinking about my readers when I wrote it. I didn't have much contact with people, Mm-hmm. When I lived in Daonan, I once got someone to write to me with the address, The Foreigner, Daonan. And it
got
arrived.
you.
Exactly.
It got you. It's a very telling story about Daonan.
No, but it's improved.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's got a McDonald's now.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I guess we'll close things out with a ringing endorsement of Daonan right there.
Okay.
The book is Formosan Odyssey, Taiwan Past and Present. The author is John Grant Ross.
Yes.
And we are very happy about the re-release, and you can, of course, find that at the Camphor Press website, on Amazon, wherever fine books are sold. John Ross, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Keith. Wonderful.
Thanks for listening to another podcast edition of Taiwan Talk. Taiwan Talk, of course, broadcasts every Monday on ICRT FM 100 at 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. right after the top of the hour newscasts. You can also find the extended podcast version of the show, which is what you were just listening to right here online at the ICRT website and on iTunes. And just to really underscore this point, the book is out now, once again, through Camphor Press. You can find it in ebook form or physical book form. I guess that's called a print edition, is what that's called. I already forgot. You can find that right now. Just head on over to campforpress.com to get your hands on that. That is going to be it for the show for today. For ICRT and Taiwan Talk, I'm Keith Manconi. See you next time.